I am from Milan in Italy, and over there, like in many other places in the world, there is a small organization, in the case it's small not-for-profit, that helps people who who are not able to file their own tax returns or cannot afford to pay for an accountant to do that, to file their tax returns. And a friend of mine a few years ago was working for them, doing some electrical installation, and they asked him to provide a queue system, so for people to know to which booth to go at what time when some consultant will become ready. And so the way they would want that was the traditional system, like with a panel, LCD and whatever. Since I was doing some web development, my friend asked me, would you like to try do it as a web application? And as a graduate in philosophy, I wasn't very sure about queue systems, algorithms, kind of things, but I decided to try. And I developed that application and in a quite short time. And after the week after I went there, just to deliver my invoice, and I saw that actually the system was working very well, not only in my test but also in real life. And it was really making things easier for everyone working there and using the services. So I was seeing the red lights going on and off and green lights when someone would become available. And I remember very well then I went out, and the moment I walked out and realized that my little application was making life easier for these people, and that's when I started realizing that yes, with code we can have an impact on lives of people. In this case, it was a very small example, but that was my purpose at the point, and has been since the purpose of making things easier for people, especially for people who have some maybe cannot afford to do things in other ways. So, slide number 2. There is a great book by a very fascinating Portuguese neuroscientist and philosopher, I would say as well. His name is Antonio Damasio, and the book, which that changed really how I look at things, at myself, at people around me, how we do things as human beings, is Looking for Spinoza. And it's a book about the physical or the neural underpinnings of feelings and emotions. And it shows how basically not only human beings but also any animal basically is driven by emotions and feelings. And I like very much this quote, which is from the Race Manifesto, because it highlights one thing that is important for me in anything I do, which is trying to achieve joy in what I do. And slide number 3. My mother retired a few years ago, and since then she's been very keen on trying poetry. So she started reading a lot of poems, a lot of poetry, and trying to write something. And through the years she became better. And a few days ago she came up with a kind of a weird request. It sounded weird to me. She sent me a poem that she wrote in Italian, and she asked me to ask my wife if she could translate it to Portuguese and to Spanish, because my mother wanted to put this poem in greeting cards for other people in the family. I'm not sure about the Spanish part because I'm not aware of having Spanish relatives. But and again, this is connected again to this quote from the Radius Manifesto, and it's familiar to WordPress developers, since Cody's poetry is one very famous quote from the WordPress website. And so, what does this all have to do with WordPress? I will just go through a very short tale of 2 newsletters. It's something that is basically the core case study that I want to present here today. This is the issue number 1 of a web and also email newsletter that was produced before I joined the LSE City Center where I work now. It was all based on HTML tables, both for the online version and for the email version. The email version needs to be somehow based on tables, but the web version was based on tables as well. It was kind of made with front page on probably Dreamweaver. It was using text, images for text for the brand font, so no HTML fonts. It was like 2005, I think, something like that. This was the first issue that I worked on. I didn't take care of the design, but it's slightly changed, and this was done as much as possible with standard, with modern HTML and CSS. It was done through a static site generator that I had developed myself before. It was a very small one, but here I think what is worrying is the number of lines of code that were in the template that I was using. It was an XSLT template to generate this newsletter, and it kept growing as people asked me to develop new features and so on. So this is how it looks like nowadays, or more similar to what it looks like nowadays. This was the latest issue that I worked on in the using the previous system, XML XSLT, and in the meanwhile, we had switched to WordPress for our website, the website, and we had started producing micro campaigns, so not a large newsletter. This one is very tall, and I reused some HTML templates from MailChimp's email blueprints, and they are around 600, almost 700 lines of code with inline CSS for the email version. So when we didn't really develop any templates for the full newsletter, for the long one, but just before the summer we wanted to produce that. This is actually hasn't been sent out for various reasons, but this is all produced within WordPress. And we wanted the email version to be table-based for simplicity. The web version, and the email version only carries the table of contents, so for images and just the table of contents. The web version has the full content and has responsive layout. It needs to be easy for current WordPress editors to produce. And we have a section of kind of highlights from previous news that people might not have read on our main website. So we just want to reuse exactly the same blog posts within WordPress and output them in the main newsletter. So basically it works like this. We use WordPress pages, and this is the main newsletter pages as a kind of placeholder. Then for each of the sections there is a subpage, and then each of the items is under that. And again, this is the second section, research, and then again other subsections, so other sub pages for nested pages for all the items within the research section. And then there is, the next slides, I will show you all the small recipes, basically all the small tools that have made my life much easier in producing this newsletter. The first is Haml. Some of you might know it, some of you might not. I think it's definitely worth to check it out if you don't know it. Can be seen as an easier way, or just shorter way, more concise way to write HTML. Comes, I think, from the Ruby world, but it's usable in many other programming languages. And this allows me to write my templates in a cleaner way, with less tags and kind of things. We don't need to close things. It's just the indentation that highlights when things are closed and so on. This is the website. I will put the slide online after the presentation, so you can check it out if you don't know it. Twig, this might be more familiar to PHP developers, is a template engine for PHP. PHP is already a template engine, but Twig makes things, provides some extra layers of safety, convenience, conciseness, and so on. This is the URL, and there is also a library which I'm not using at the moment, but for WordPress to bring basically Twig into WordPress if you're interested in using that for your themes. And empty Haml, which is something that I discovered later on, was really a blessing for me, because basically it is some PHP code that brings together Twigs, the template system, and all the efficiency, and Haml in that very concise syntax that makes my work much more productive. This is the reference. And then again, for the front-end development in a way, Sass and Compass. Again, some of you might know these tools. Sass is a CSS preprocessor, allowing you to reuse components, styles, and layouts throughout your style sheets, and then compiles to standard CSS. So there is no need for anything special on the front end. And Compass is an authoring framework on top of Sass. And for example, it helps with a lot of color handling, or browser prefixes for experimental CSS3 features, and so on. Again, it makes my work much easier and much more pleasurable. And these are the references. Another thing that I've started doing is basically separating fully the content and all the data management to extract the data from the backend, from the database, from the generation of the templates. So templates are made through empty Haml with Haml syntax, and what this also allows, basically, in order to generate the data that then populates the templates that I use, I just need this couple of lines, and this function basically is the function that does all the core work, fetches all the information through WordPress functions, through database queries and so on, and puts together a big data structure, a PHP array, that then is the document, and then I pass that to the template, and the template then puts outputs the information in the correct place. And this is very useful, not only because it makes things cleaner to debug, to maintain, and so on, but also because with the same, it's not much harder. Actually, it's very straightforward, not only to generate HTML output, but also, for example, a JSON output, which then can be used, not consumed by website visitors directly, but can be used in APIs, or maybe JavaScript, one single page application that then fetches information, exactly the same information that is displayed on the main website, but maybe does something else with that information and displays in different ways, or uses it for some database, so from other queries to sort things and so on. And stepping back in the backend instead, something that helps a lot my own development, especially when I work with others, but also when I work by myself, is using Git as version control. Some of you might be using Git, some others might be using Mercurial and so on. And specifically, this is, I will have references down, but it's a workflow that has been proposed around 3 years ago, based on the master branch. If you're familiar with Git, is what is always deployable. But you always work on new features in feature branches. So I want to develop a new template for something that's completely separate from another template I might have developed yesterday, and I don't want the changes that I do in one template to interfere with the others when I deploy, when I test, and so on. So everything is kept in separate branches, then integrated into a develop branch, tested there, and then when it's ready for deployment, it goes back into the master branch. There is the methodology described in this blog post, and there is also a plugin for Git that allows to work more efficiently throughout this system. Another thing that helps me save time and make sure that there are no mistakes throughout deployment is using Git to deploy. Okay, there is a rake task here, so basically it's just a command that I give on the command line. Deploy the current theme in this case to my live target, and this is just the standard Git push output. But then what is interesting is what happens afterwards. This is just a continuation of the previous page. Some things happen on the receiving side. So, for example, there is submodule in my JavaScript folders for a JavaScript plugin that gets checked out from GitHub and put into the resulting theme. And again, using another very useful software, which is Composer, all the dependencies of my theme, in this case, get pulled in from Git or wherever they are available by Composer, which is, some of you might know, it's a dependency manager for PHP. So basically, I don't have to worry about. At the beginning, this was done through either incorporating the code of some libraries in my own theme, or fetching them through Git submodules. But this way, it's just cleaner. Once the code is pushed to the live server, all the dependencies are fetched, and all the latest ones, or the version that I decided I need, and they're made available to the theme. And there is also Capiphony is the system that I use kind of homemade. It's very simple, a few lines of code. But there is something like Capiphony, which is you can download it, free software, and it helps to do kind of deployments through Git to to any target. Another tool that is very useful, especially when dealing with large installations, is WP CLI, which is a set of command line tools to manage WordPress installations, especially large installations. And you can basically do anything you do by clicking around the admin interface, configuring parameters, installing plugins, installing themes, enabling, disabling users, or other things that normally one would do through the web interface. So, going back to the original 3 items: purpose, joy, and poetry. Again, how does WordPress fit in? The default is, for many people coming as a first step into the world of WordPress, there is kind of a canonical way of doing things, which is using plugins, themes, the admin interface, clicking around. And it's great because it helps new users to easily find their way within WordPress, install plugins for whatever they need them for, themes, experiment with themes, and so on. But it's not much of the small recipes that I presented in the last few slides are actually used in the default way of doing things. And that's fine, of course, because WordPress, we can say that it's an opinionated framework, and also the fact of having a strong opinion about how things are done, at least by default or for beginners, is part of the strength and the way that it has spread so widely and is being so successful. But for me, I'm not only a developer, but also I manage installations, large and small, of WordPress. Anything that is not done through scripts, through the command line, is a bit of a nightmare. Imagine handling hundreds of installations and clicking around to make sure that you configure each of them the same way. It's completely impossible. Large hosting companies can build expertise and have the tools, or can develop the tools to handle this kind of installations. But what about small businesses? And I think this kind of connects to something that we were discussing before in the previous presentations and in the discussions. What about small businesses? They cannot really afford to have people working for them to develop the whole infrastructure. It's fine, there are companies that provide this, but what is, from my point of view as a free software developer, my dream is that small businesses and not-for-profit organizations could be able to handle large-scale installations of WordPress in the same simple way that a newcomer can just install WordPress in 5 minutes and start working with that. So is another WordPress possible? A WordPress that is not a fork, is not an alternative. Sorry, it's not a fork. It's not competing with the WordPress, but it's a set of best practices that use the same core WordPress to do things in a way that might help large-scale installations. In a way, I think that another WordPress is already happening. If you've seen Matt Mullenweg's presentation at the WordCamp San Francisco this year, the direction seems to be WordPress as an application framework somehow, and it has, of course, been changing throughout the time. If we look at WordPress as not only as an app framework, but a free software ecosystem, and most importantly as an ecosystem, and if we see free software as collective wisdom, so not so much collaborating, that is very good on developing plugins, on themes, but also avoiding that each of one has to learn things from scratch and can learn from things that others have already developed, from code that is already out there, improve it, and so on. So this is great, and of course WordPress supports this way of working. But still, I think the part that is somehow missing, several organizations, companies, and projects are trying to address that, is the managing of all of this. So making it easy for people to work towards their purpose, to work with joy, and to work the WordPress way, but in a way that is also compatible with managing large-scale installations. So just to conclude, I am trying to set up a new side project, which is called WordOps. It's wordops.io. At the moment, there is nothing apart from a sign-up form. I'm trying to, basically the idea is to develop another blog in a way, about WordPress resources, best practices, interviews, some specific tapas, like the ones that I presented today, and the way that people in real life implement them in their projects, to try to build a corpus of knowledge and information accessible to everyone, free from advertising, just as a not-for-profit project that builds another WordPress, which is the same WordPress, but experimenting with large-scale installations and the way that I've tried to depict it today. So for the moment, I'm exploring what is out there, trying to put up the initial content, and hopefully that will become another resource for the WordPress community, especially when dealing with big installations or just wanting to try some of the tools that I've presented today and many others that are for sure out there and many of you might be using. And I think that's all. So, any questions?
Hi there. Have you found a good way to do database migrations?
Database migrations, yes and no. I found something while researching for this presentation. I don't remember the name of that tool. It's from I think it's called Waylaika. It's an Italian design development company working with WordPress. They do the first thing that came to under my attention was plugin that allows to use a HAML in your own themes. But I just think that they're starting doing something like that. So basically, use your own local copy of WordPress and then deploy to. I guess is that correct? Yeah, to deploy to live server or staging server. So if you just contact me afterwards, I can just look up quickly the reference and give it to you. But it's not something that I'm using myself at the moment. And it's something that I'm very interested in, alongside with security and other things that I've not addressed in this presentation.
So maybe I can ask another question, which is, when dealing with large, complex WordPress installations, what are the main challenges you have been finding? Is it database scaling or other issues?
Well, there are several issues, of course. One of them is an area of issues is scaling, is caching, is dealing with this content delivery network, CDNs, and so on. Of course, there is the issue of security, making sure that people that are using your WordPress infrastructure for any variety of things are always kept, their own installations get secure. But for me, because of the way of the things that I do, specifically in which I specialize, the main challenge is really making sure that, for example, if we have a database, like a company database with information about configuration of services for a customer, expiration dates of a service, and so on, how do I make sure that all the information kept in internal kind of business logic is then replicated efficiently and kept up to date in clients' WordPress installations, so installing themes according to what is being agreed and so on. That's why I'm very interested in this kind of automatic deployment, WP CLI, and so on.
What kind of tests do you do after all the automation? You do driven behavior?
That is something that I am still very much learning how to do. Yeah. But yeah, there are great examples. I think, for example, the WP CLI project I like very much, not only the way the project itself and the utility task for me, but also the way it is developed, BDD, TDD, and so on. I find it a bit hard at the moment because, I mean, I'm probably more interested in testing the deployment in a way. The front-end development work is part of my work, but it's not my main area of expertise or interest in a way. But yeah, there are, and also I think that if you use tools like Composer, for example, to bring in PHP unit or other things that you need for your testing, then anything, whatever way you decide, because maybe you're more familiar, you think that it's better for your specific use case, it's much easier to do that consistently and never forget. For example, my Git-based deployment and the Composer integration at the end, which pulls libraries from GitHub. I did that because at some point I was still doing things partly manually for that thing, and one day one of the plugins or something didn't go live and the website was broken and whatever. So this allows you to basically make sure that either things work or you get notified straight away when you are deploying.